Hey, welcome to episode 6 of One Life Explore Edition. This is Matt.
And this is Sarah.
If you haven't had an opportunity to listen to or watch our previous episodes, we'd invite you to do that. You can check those out on YouTube, and we'd love for you to be a part of all the conversation leading up to it, because what we're doing is we're understanding what a worldview is. We're asking the most important and meaningful questions of life and giving anyone a space to explore those in a safe way and to be able to ask questions. So if you're watching live right now, that's terrific. You can utilize the chat feature and ask any of those questions that we'll utilize in our Q&A. Or if you're watching later, use the comment section, and we're going to be continuing having discussions even after episodes finish airing.
Definitely, and we didn't know what was going to be happening in our culture, in our country, weeks ago when we were planning out these topics and lining them up, but these conversations have become more relevant than ever as we talk about things like what's wrong with the world, and tonight as we get into the question of what's the cure, and we believe that there is one. We believe that Jesus, the gospel, presents that for us. And so as we get into these topics, we hope that you guys will join in on the discussion, and we have other ways that we're talking about these things as well. We have the One Life podcast each week where we're talking about these things. Sarah, you want to tell them about it?
Yeah, actually myself and our lead pastor Brett co-host that each week, and we've been doing the podcast for a while. We want to shift the conversation a little bit on that, because when we talk about what is the cure, and everyone's asking questions as it comes to racial reconciliation and what can we do? And sometimes, and probably right now, it's just listening to other voices. We're having people of color come on and just be able to share their own experiences and be able to listen and learn together. And so we'd invite you to join us there as we listen and learn and make that part of the solution.
Definitely, and it's been fun, and I've learned a lot already from listening in on those. So the conversation comes up, what's right and wrong, and that's something that's been talked about for ages, and it finds its way into famous stories, famous movies, and there's the villain oftentimes, and there's the hero. Sarah, what's some of the most famous kind of villains that come to mind?
I think right now we think about famous villains. Thanos comes to mind for a lot of people because we just, got through 10 years of Marvel movies, which are incredible. But probably my favorite, or I don't know if it's my favorite, it's really not the right word, the villain that pops into my mind when you say villain, the TV show Sherlock, which was on BBC and PBS aired it as well, had a villain, Moriarty, and he was just this guy that was so smart, and you wanted Sherlock to beat him so bad, and it was like fun to watch their go back and forth, and there was something about him that was just really interesting to watch, and I always think of like villain Moriarty. Definitely,
yeah, they did so good with that show. You? Me, I've always been a huge Star Wars fan since I can remember, and when I think villains, I always think Darth Vader first and foremost, and what I always thought was interesting about that though is his son Luke. He saw some hope, he saw some light in him when nobody else did. I mean, he was the baddest dude in the galaxy, and then it becomes a redemption story out of nowhere, and I always loved that, and that gives me hope. And when we think about that, we're in a time that's dark, and we don't think there can be any cure for this. And so tonight we're gonna watch a film that gives the possibility of, what is the cure for all the hurt and the pain that we see in the world. And then we're gonna, as always, continue discussion with our lead pastor, Brett.
Imagine you've done something genuinely awful. All your friends, family, and society agree it's awful. At first, you don't see it as awful because you had your reasons. You believe it was justified. But the more you think about it and listen to others, you finally come to the crushing reality that you are truly guilty. Guilty of something awful. Is there any way to get the stain of awfulness removed, or are you condemned to live the rest of your life as the one who did something awful? One approach would be to adopt a worldview that says, good and evil don't really exist. It's not hard to find philosophers who would agree with you. Taking that approach, you might be able to convince yourself you were in the clear, but it would be doubly hard to convince everyone else, especially those who suffered from your awful deed. While some worldviews hold that good and evil are simply social constructs, let's face it, the idea doesn't match our experience. From racism to rape to thievery and exploitation, jealousy, murder, human trafficking, deception, hypocrisy, and arrogance. It's not hard to come up with a list of awful things human beings commit. And all of them qualify as genuinely wrong in a very real way. When awful acts are committed, most of us can feel the sense of justice well up within us that says, someone should pay a price for that. Most of our stories, and especially TV shows and movies, run on this plotline. Good person is opposed by a bad person. The bad person is the one who does all kinds of awful things, usually with a really awful attitude. By the end, you want the bad person to pay a price for being bad. A good story ends when the good person triumphs over the bad person. We're very creative on how we deal out justice to our bad guys. And it's not just in our stories. We see it in real life. Although we debate what kinds of punishment should be handed out to criminals, we all agree that something should happen. It's hard to imagine a world where the attitude to truly awful actions was something like, well, as long as you say you're sorry, no harm, no foul. That doesn't feel like justice. It feels superficial and disrespectful. Let's go back to our question. Let's say I realize I've done something awful and I want to get rid of the guilt. How do I wipe away the stain? Each worldview has some answer to the question of human guilt in light of justice. Eastern religions of most varieties think in terms of karma. Karma is the notion that one's present fate, one's pleasure or pain, one's being a king or a slave or a gnat, is the result of past action, especially in a former existence. The way the stain of awfulness is taken away is to do better in the new life version of who you are. But it's important to note, this is an impersonal system. There is no personal God to offer forgiveness. All I have to go on is to assume I might be doing something that will help me in the future. If we view life as nothing more than material things like atoms and molecules, the problem becomes even more, problematic. On this view, ethical requirements are the product of evolutionary history over time formed by whole societies. Society defines what is right, condemns what is wrong, and therefore can give out or withhold forgiveness. That raises a few questions. 1. If our brain cells are the product of impersonal, natural forces, who or what gives society the right to define right and wrong? After all, societies are simply large collections of individuals. 2. Throughout history, whole societies have participated in awful things. Who defines good and evil for them? 3. What if society decided to not grant forgiveness? Does that mean I am irredeemable? Islam takes a more personal approach. One Muslim website put it like this: if one repents sincerely and follows it up with righteous deeds and believes, then God promises them heaven and tells them that they will never be wronged. God holds no grudges. There is always a chance. Islam is a religion of hope. Our Muslim neighbor is glad to do all he can in order to measure up on the last day, and he knows that Allah is good. But the one underlying problem is, he cannot erase the question mark that always hangs over him when it comes to his eternal destiny and final judgment. Did I measure up or not? How can I know? John the Baptist is attested by history and viewed by Islam as a prophet, and was respected in his day as a great man of God. When he saw Jesus of Nazareth publicly, he would announce, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." In the Jewish context of the first century, where life happened in the shadow of the great temple of Herod, where lambs were regularly offered as sacrifices for sin, it would have conjured up a vivid image in everyone's mind. It said simply, I've done something awful. I deserve to pay for the awful thing I've done, but instead, someone will stand in my place. Justice will be done, but I will be set free. Enter the cross. On the surface, the concept seems primitive, but if we think about how life really goes, we will see that it's not such a primitive idea after all. How is justice honored and forgiveness offered at the same time? The cross answers the question. It says the awful thing was truly awful and should be punished. But it also says someone else willingly paid the price in your place. The early Christian writer Paul summed it up well in his letter to the church at Rome. God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Well, let's continue to explore the ideas of right and wrong, justice, and forgiveness. Right now, at this recording, I'm sitting in a time of history, and I'm confident it will live on and will continue to be relevant. The whole world is embroiled right now in the discussion and the reaction to the killing of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin, who was a police officer, and it was watched on film, and now there are protests literally going on all around the country, but not only that, all around the world. And what this incident can do for us is help us to pull together many of the ideas that were talked about in just the film that we were looking at just now, but the things that we've been talking about up until now. Here's what I mean by that. Again, all over the world, people are calling something wrong. Now that seems simple enough. I mean, this was caught on video. Derek Chauvin put his knee on George Floyd's neck for nearly 10 minutes, and literally it was caught on film, and people watched this man die. And now there is upheaval. There is outcry where we're all defining it as that was wrong. Well, it's simple enough until you ask some harder questions. I want to take you back to the very first worldview question we asked, because it's the most important one in the end. Where did everything come from? Now, what a Christ-centered worldview would say is everything came from an all-powerful, all-knowing, personal, righteous, and good God. A personality made everything and made it intentionally. And as a result, we can have an answer to those kinds of questions that I'll show in here in just a moment. But naturalism, and one of the reasons I bring naturalism up a lot is because it's increasing in popularity around the world. Naturalism is the belief that everything came from, starting with nothing, but then physical properties, just atoms and molecules, literally not being guided by any kind of foreordained or purposeful end. They all just began, and everything is ultimately accidental. I want to give a quote that I gave the last time from Richard Dawkins, because he sums it up pretty well. Listen to what he says. "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose," and then listen to what he adds, "no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." Why did he add no evil and no good? Well, the reason's pretty simple. Because physical properties don't have moral categories. They can't produce more good or evil. They just are. They don't follow those guidelines. Well, we've talked about implications, but if you extend that out, the belief in naturalism is the belief that those accidental processes produced all of us, produced me, produced you, produced everything, produced our thoughts. So where do morals come in? You see, as you listen to everybody talk, everybody's saying that was wrong, period. It's not a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of what goes on in my brain. And I can prove it by saying, okay, I disagree that's not wrong. The guy can do that if he wanted to. Everybody would tell me I was wrong. And that proves that we're appealing to something above us and outside of us. It's not just the product of our own brains. Now, typically what naturalists will do is they will say society formed these ideas. Through our evolutionary process, society have come up with what is right and what is wrong. But the problem with that is, don't you think back in, say, the America in the South, in about 1820, if Derek Chauvin was there then, they wouldn't have thought it was wrong. They thought of black people as property and less than human, and he would have been able to do what he wanted to do. There wouldn't have been an outcry, right? Well, we all determine, if we look back on that, we say, well, that's wrong. Or what are we getting that from? That was a society. We all believe innately that some things are wrong at all times for all people in every way. And we prove that to ourselves. And I keep repeating, one of the main reasons that I believe the Christ-centered worldview is the truth is because it corresponds to reality as we experience it and as we live it. And it's being lived all around the world now. So the first thing is there is such a thing as right and wrong. But then the second thing that's going on is because of the wrong, and this is really what the film was talking about more and more, is because that there's justice needed. There's a price to pay, right? Something wrong was done. Someone ought to pay. Derek Chauvin did a thing that he needs to be punished. It's right for him to be punished. That's what we call justice, and that's what everybody's crying out for. Just imagine him coming before a judge, and the judge just said, you said you were sorry? Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, kind of sorry. Okay, it's good enough for me, and cracked the gavel, and he walked off. There'd be a whole other round of people crying out that injustice happened. So where do we get that? This whole price thing. Now, putting those two things together, there's a question I want you to think about. Derek Chauvin, we all know he's guilty. How does he find redemption? Can he find redemption? Can he find forgiveness? Now, I'll bet you anything, because I know people, I know myself, I know you, we've all done this. When we do wrong, and we all know we do, when we do wrong, the first line of attack is what we call justification. He will try to adjust it, and he will say, well, I did this because in my circumstance, I didn't really break that wrong. I did it because of this. And he will try to, in his mind, figure that out. That's how most of us give to ourselves a false redemption, honestly. We come up with our own justifications. The problem is that people on the outside who are in touch with this greater thing are going to say, those justifications do not work. They don't. You did something full on wrong. But then let's imagine that he realizes that and he says, okay, I did. I really did. Oh my goodness. Am I guilty forever and ever? Do I have to live with this for the rest of my life? Can I be forgiven? And as we pointed out in the film, and I want to repeat again because it's so critical, the Christ-centered worldview answers the question of how do we know what's right and wrong. It's because we believe in a personal, all-powerful creator who is the very source and measure of all right and wrong, and he's the judge. Second of all, he's the one that wants justice, and he's the judge, and he will pay back, the Bible says, to each one according to their deeds. We want that reality to be there, and we all innately believe it. But the greatest question of all is, how can justice be honored and forgiveness offered at the same time? That's a trickier question. We want justice done. And Derek Chauvin knows that justice is going to be done. But can he be redeemed at all? If so, how? But that's what the cross is all about. The cross, that we see this strange religious image on the top of churches and on walls and around people's necks, what it's getting at is that core principle that we live with in life all the time. We really do. Because we deal with that right and wrong and justice and price paying all the time. We all long for forgiveness, but we all long for justice to be done. And that's how it is. See, the cross takes our sin, our violations of justice, our wrong, very, very seriously. It demonstrates this is what happens, and this is what should happen when you do wrong. But at the same time, human beings can be redeemed. There's a great quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He said, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. See, the problem is, it's not just the Derek Chauvins of the world. All of us have the same problem, according to the Bible, according to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. That evil and good cuts right through my own heart. How do I come to a place where justice can be honored, but forgiveness can be offered? That's the good news of Jesus, and that's the good news of the cross. And if you're exploring the Christian faith, you have to understand that that's the bottom line. That's really the essential idea that it's driving at and calling us all to. And I came with all my unrighteousness and all my stuff that I had done wrong. And I said, I need forgiveness in the face of justice. And that's my call to you. That's what it really means to start following Jesus, is come to that conclusion. My goodness, I've got evil inside of me, and I need justice to be honored, but I need forgiveness offered, and I receive it, and I ask for it. That's something to think about.
As we close out this episode today, we just want to remind you that if you haven't had an opportunity to watch some previous episodes, you can do that on our YouTube channel. We'd invite you to join in all the questions and conversations that we've had so far. Also, if you're watching live right now, we'd love to just maybe one thing that you either took away or had a question about, or maybe a question that popped up in your mind while you're watching, or maybe if you're watching later, utilize the comment section as well. We want to continue having dialogue with you as we continue through this series. And also, we want to give you just resources. There's other ways that you can continue either by reading, watching, or listening. So check out the link in the description or in the chat.
Definitely, and continue this conversation with people in your life. You know, if this sparks some ideas in you, if you find anything interesting in any of the resources, let's be people who have these conversations, not just here, but just in our normal day-to-day conversations, because we can all continue to talk about this stuff more and get better. And definitely join us for the next episode, which is we're going to show my favorite film that we did out of all of these. It's called Is There Hope? And we talk about, you know, the greatest enemy that we all face is the idea of death. And what does that mean for us? And is there something bigger than that? And so we guys hope you enjoyed this. We look forward to continuing the conversation, and we'll see you next time.